Our two panel guests with us for the rest of the programme today. They'll be lending us all their analysis and personal takes on the events and issues of the day. With me here in the studio is Nitasha Kaul, a British Kashmiri academic, writer and poet. She's Professor of Politics, International Relations and Critical Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Westminster in London. And we're also joined down the line by Alistair Burt, Distinguished Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute. That's a think tank. He's also a former long-serving British MP for the Conservative Party and a former Foreign Office Minister. Alistair Burt. And here in the studio, Nitasha Kaul. When I read out your job description, it's very varied, isn't it? How do you manage to straddle being a novelist, a poet and an academic? It sounds quite taxing.
It's actually quite interesting, and I think that there's just so much in the world that the more languages we have of communicating why it's important to think about things is feels quite natural. But yes, you're right in that it is quite rare to do interdisciplinary work. I trained as an economist originally 25 years ago, and which feels like a long time ago. And it seems that I think now that when I think back, I think a lot of what I've worked on have also been driven by world events. The recession in 2008, the significance of thinking about the relationship between economic principles and people's lives, following on, especially in large parts of the world, particularly India 2014 onwards, the democratic backsliding that's been going on. So now I direct, apart from my academic work, I direct the Center for the Study of Democracy, and the democratic backsliding, recession, as well as the changes in global order and the creeping tide of authoritarianism preoccupies a lot of my work, and that's what I've been doing in more recent years quite a bit of. I'm also, as you mentioned, originally from Kashmir, and I've authored political fiction. My first novel was called Residue. It was set in Berlin and was about divided places. It was shortlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. And my more recent novel called Future Tense was published in 2020. And interestingly enough, it's set in the period between 2014 and 2018 about young people's lives in conflict. And then in 2019, the changes happened to the region. And I found myself as an academic expert actually giving testimony on the region at the US Congress.
Goodness.
So I feel that there's... Alistair just mentioned the young people. There's many ways, and I think education is an important way in which we can speak about these principles and the changes.
Yeah, and very briefly, I mean, when you're writing your sort of more artistic work, I guess, do you think that draws people into politics and sort of current affairs in a way that they would be turned off if they were just watching the news?
I think that's very much the case, because what we see around us are projects of persuasion, and these are successful political projects of persuasion. And as social scientists, we draw the line between choice and constraints, and we think of what are causal relations here sometimes. But in a more affective sense, we're thinking about people's lives, and I think that helps reach a larger number of people and get people to really feel why does it matter to think about something. And I think that feeling and affect part, I think the arts and culture has a really important place for that. For that.
Well, we will be talking about culture later in the programme. Nitasha Kaul and Alistair Burt with us throughout. Let's head first today.
Thank you. I think this is it's really heartening that the bill failed with 112 to 11. 11 people voting in favor. I think it represents the wider right-wing resentment that we see in lots of contexts around reinterpreting history and trying to construct a politics out of it. So in the Treaty of Waitangi, it's now nearly 2 centuries old, dates from 1840. It's one of the less worst treaties, if I may put it that way, because, say, for instance, I've done a lot of work on imperial geopolitics in the Himalayas. And when I look at, say, the 1910 treaty, for instance, between Britain and Bhutan, it has a lot more problems, and it took a long time to do anything with it. So I think that the good thing that New Zealand Aotearoa has been doing is to have these evolving interpretations in a more progressive direction to increase representation and address the historical structural injustices. And this bill was an attempt to sort of take that back, walk back with it. And the fact that it's galvanized, as we've just heard, the fact that the backlash has actually has actually constructed a consensus against the bill is, I think, positive and heartening.
For the country. Alistair, your thought? Briefly, Nitasha, your view on this?
Well, a nation is an imagined community, and writers, I think, are migrants of the imagination. In a sense, writing and storytelling is very central to our existence, and especially if there is this past of tragedy and conflict. So I think that the fact of putting together these voices in the diaspora is such an important act to be able to convey that forward. How tragedy is remembered forward and how it can be healed from.
Thank you. And so that book there, co-edited by Viet Thanh Nguyen, The Cleaving. And Nguyen, thank you very much. Alistair Burt joins us down the line. He's a former British MP and Foreign Office Minister, now a distinguished fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. And Nitasha Kaul is with me here in the studio. She's a British Kashmiri academic and writer and professor of politics, international relations and critical interdisciplinary studies at the University of Westminster. Lots to come from them this hour. Listening to that, Nitasha Kaul and Alistair Burt, our guests today. Nitasha, what do you make of this? I mean, is it broadly positive that these talks on any level are happening at all?
I suppose the first thing to say is that, yes, it does open up the diplomatic space, and both sides have used the word constructive, which is the one common word that has occurred. So I think that I would sort of slightly push back against the speaker just now, in the sense that the trust deficit is on both sides, and the Iranian regime certainly has a lot to answer for, to its people, to its regarding the action of proxies in the region. And it is true, they are under significant economic and military pressure, especially with the current the economic pressure has been there for a while, but the current regime in the US with Trump in charge, nothing can really be ruled as being off the table. So I think in a negotiation, each side would want to talk itself up. But I think that the one thing that we can hope for is that there would be some sincerity and probably slow progress. But it is quite important that they've said that there will be another another meeting next Saturday. Yeah. I think this is a wait and watch story with a very cautious bit of hope.
Yes, I mean, just briefly, Mr. Trump is doing the sort of hard man negotiator thing again. Do you think that will work with the Iranians?
It's difficult to say, because I think that as we saw with the Ukraine and Russia attempt, the idea of getting a ceasefire actually depends a lot on what and also in this case it depends a lot on how sincere the objective is and whether the stated goals are the same as the ones that everyone thinks are the stated goals. So there's a lot to read between the lines here, but I think that it would be one doesn't want to be negative and cynical, but I think there's a cautious amount of hope, and let's hope that there's some constructive action to come.
There's a long way to go still, yes. Alistair Burt, NASA astronaut. Natasha, what do you make of this story? Is this trip doing anything for women in the space industry?
Absolutely. I think it's doing a lot for women everywhere.
Oh, good.
I think the idea is that empowerment can be pretty symbolic. I still remember watching the Wonder Woman movie and thinking that when I was growing up, there was nothing on screen that showed that women could be doing things like this. So, and we see how women in STEM in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, medicine, continues to be a thing. So the fact that the richest man in the world can put a car in space is perhaps to some people not the best use of money. Well, women, if they can afford it, should be equally able to do whatever they want to do. So the point is not really whether, this is substantial or shallow. I think the idea is, if it is a person's choice, and we can't really judge everything by the price of eggs. I thought I heard eggs being mentioned in the first segment, and I thought, are we heading to an egg standard? If it isn't going to bring the price of eggs, then it's not worth it.
I think it's the new economy in the States at the moment, isn't it?
I organized deliberative forums in Bhutan, and the first female astroscientist was one of them. It is so powerful to see women being able to do such things. So I think it's a plus.
Well, I found Susan very inspiring. Alistair, I don't know if you... Natasha, I mean, these are two very different countries, aren't they? They've got very different histories, completely different language, different cultures. And, I mean, I guess, it's a natural human thing to have a fear of the unknown. This kind of thing breaks that down, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think we're in a really unfortunate situation currently with not the least because of the hubris involved of political leaders, but culture and economy are really intertwined. Culture is really a kind of soft power in a realist sense, but more than that, it's a mechanism for influence and understanding and appreciation of different points of view. So this is the reason why any authoritarian closed system always wants to restrict cultural exchange, restrict and curate cultural exchange. So I think this present move is a signal. I think this is again yet another use of culture in the context of geopolitics right now. But culture is quite important, and I'm hoping that as your speaker said and as Alistair said, it is really important that we appreciate that there are these long histories. I remember a novel from 1930s written by a Chinese author called Fortress Besieged, which is about Chinese intellectuals who have studied in the US going back to China. And this absolutely, these are two very different sorts of cultural, contexts. Mm-hmm. But this is precisely why there should be more rather than less exchange. And clearly this restriction makes sense only in the context of the present situation.
Yeah.
But it's also debatable the extent to which it will really have an effect, given that a lot of movies in China currently are domestic ones that
made
succeed.
in China.
And Hollywood isn't really Trump's stronghold. So it's also debatable the extent to which that really kind of gets at this.
Yeah, it's not the first time this has happened. Nitasha, I mean, it is the weekend, which is giving everyone a bit of a breathing space, but, it's not that many hours before the Asian markets start opening again, and we know what happened last week. What are you anticipating this week?
Well, I wish that we could have a clear sense. In economics, there is a famous distinction, early 20th century, Knightian distinction between risk and uncertainty. Risk is where you know the probabilities, at least. Uncertainty is just radical. What we've seen is really erratic sort of policy making without any sense of what the end goal is and how it is to be achieved. So between yesterday and today, literally in the last 24 hours, we have had another change that actually puts trade surplus countries at a greater disadvantage. So it's not clear what is going on because nobody can read the inside of President Trump's mind. And that seems to be a large part of what's driving things here. So I think absolutely we should all try and see how best this situation can be navigated. But at the heart of it is this kind of policy making which nobody is used to and which doesn't seem to be serving anyone's interests, including those of Americans. The former, Anthony Blinken, he recently said this feels more like America alone rather than America first.
Right.
I agree.
A very difficult panel. We've got Alistair Burt, former British MP, with us, and Nitasha Kaul, British Kashmiri academic and writer. Nitasha, do you have a comment or question for Annette?
Well, I think the comment first. So I would like to say that I think it is interesting that while there was this expectation that the incumbent would do much better, the fact that the left-wing challenger, Gonzalez, has actually been made this so close, I think it indicates that human security is quite important to people and that security is multidimensional, so livelihoods and structures matter just as well. To the speaker, to the guest, I would want to ask, you mentioned this increase. Are there particular factors in the last 5 years that fed into this increase? Because the introduction to Ecuador that we had before in social science was this place of earth jurisprudence innovation. It was the first country in the world to give nature the rights of nature in the constitution, making nature a legal entity. So could you say a bit more about what dramatically changed in this period?
Yeah, Annette, I don't know whether we've still got you. I heard some strangeness. That's a good point, Nitasha.
Absolutely echoing just Alistair's point again, the interconnected insecurity dynamics here, and also as was just explained by the speaker, the fact that changes in the neighboring country, it just shows us that these kinds of dynamics do not stop at national borders, and therefore we have to think of how democratic politicians can find the right balance of policies between fear and hope. And I think the closeness of this challenge reflects that in the race in Ecuador reflects that.
Annette, Natasha, I mean, we also heard from the US Federal Reserve last week saying it was absolutely prepared to intervene to calm nervous financial markets. What did they mean by that, and how serious would that be?
Well, I think that there was this day, I think it was Wednesday last week, that I spent a lot of time glued to Twitter looking at these changes, because for a moment it seemed like we were going to have witnessed something major happen in real time. I wonder how much these sorts of statements make an effect, given that the central source of the uncertainty is the erratic and rather personalized decision making by President Trump himself. The main thing isn't that people didn't know that he was going to bring in tariffs. It is not the best instrument, because tariffs are taxes. But at the end of the day, you can't have a sledgehammer sort of a policy where a scalpel is needed. There may be sectors where it would have made sense, and countries where some amount of work on the tariffs needed to have been done. But this kind of bringing in tariffs by a formula that no one knows, announcing that exemptions for American businesses would be made by instinct, I quote him in response to a journalist, it really affects the confidence of the world and the world's investors in the US bonds. And it makes everyone think, what can we plan for a few months down the line. And the fact that you mentioned the announcement on Friday, I mean, it's really politics as entertainment, isn't it? We've been seeing a lot of these Friday night announcements. It's almost like a TV show.
Well, next week China will be hosting the world's first half marathon race between humans and robots in Beijing. It was supposed to be held today, but it's been postponed because of those strong winds. I've been speaking to Alan Fern. He's Professor of Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence. So what do we make of this then? Professor Fern told me you could get hold of a humanoid robot for about $16,000, but a really good one is going to set you back about $100,000.
I think I'm personally more interested in cat robots as an urban dweller. I think if I could get a moving cat robot that could meow and walk, I think I would love it. But, more seriously, I think that I have a metal plate in my arm. I've had it a long time. I work by voice. Technology has made my life and my work possible. So I'm sort of an optimist when it comes to these things. And I think these kinds of robots do have important applications in rescue and for, where human beings, it would be hard for them to go in prosthetics. So I think it is important. I think the general thing that we have to think about is who's doing the regulation, are the resources being directed in the right places, and are we aware, one, of the ethical implications and how we design them, the biases especially that often come in, and then this other question, the question that I can't go into right now, but that I love about explainable AI that I've written about, which is fascinating because in a sense they're intelligent, but they're not intelligent in the sense most people understand what intelligence is from a human point of view.
But they're getting more intelligent. I also have a metal plate in my arm. So where's kind of humanoids this end, Alistair? How about you? How do you feel about this?
I'm intrigued by the idea of a robotic cat, and maybe at Lancaster University, where we do robotics, we could find a way of helping you out on that.
Would it be as affectionate, though? I mean, this is the thing.
I'm sorry.
The cat, would it be as affectionate?
Well, there is a thing called affective computing, and these kinds of you can call them toys, but they're really useful for people who are, solitary or elderly. That's in fact one of the ways in which they're being developed. One of their applications is for use in affective computing.
Listening to that, our guests, Alistair Burt and Nitasha Kaul. Natasha, you're obviously an economist. Do you understand Henry's argument there? Has he got a point?
I certainly empathize with his argument. I think people want to be treated better and they want to be paid better. The other thing he said, which was about having a closed mind, I think it's equally a problem that supporters of a certain project do not look at criticisms of the current policies, which are not necessarily, in fact, hardly likely that they would help these very people. But, in both as an economist and as a political scientist, one of the things that I've argued is how neoliberalism and nationalism nationalism are combined. These contradictory things are combined rhetorically in these political projects, and Trump's project is an example of that, that promises to make life better for the working class while at the same time delivering significant advantages to the oligarchs and some of the wealthiest elites. So a lot of this work is rhetorical. I mean, in the sense that towns like the one he mentioned and places like this obviously do need help. We know of places like this everywhere, and that needs targeted help to help those economies, because it is a question of scale. It's a question of more specific kinds of help, and what these kinds of self-inflicted wounds, like, for example, what's happening with the trade war right now, or I would also even include Brexit in this, or the demonetization situation in India. These are policies that are sensational. They promise a lot. They are not always well thought out, and we noticed that ex post facto much later. And it's quite sad, because policy and politics is really a lot of like boring expertise stuff. It's a lot of people having to think carefully and plan ahead and plan ahead to what the consequences are going to be. But this kind of thing, it helps build support for these projects, but they're sort of sensationalist, right? And they promise this magical delivery, and they say, well, in that very kind of almost theological language, that you have to suffer, right, in order to get to the promised place, which will come on the horizon, but they don't. We don't always see that being delivered. So I really feel for him, but this doesn't seem to be the way to go about it.
Right. So it's kind of cynical take on the politics and politicians.
Yeah, two things. Firstly, I'm increasingly thinking that Natasha and I were separated at birth, because so much of what she says resonates with me. And secondly,
done sort of having secret schools or education, people getting books through to people. There's a lot of online action, I understand. Roya, I want to bring in the panel. Nitasha Kaul and Alistair Burt is down the line, because I'm sure they've got questions for you as well. Natasha.
It is, I think, a film like this and stories like this are a rare bright star in what is otherwise a pitch dark firmament. I've worked, a lot of my life has been occupied with thinking about misogyny and how that matters, and repression and why that's important to address. So when I look at what still goes on and the extent to which women are denied education, denied being able to communicate with each other, denied even training as midwives by the most recent orders, that actually puts them at even more serious risk. It's just, the contrast is just incredibly powerfully tragic. I was last month in this seminar in Sweden, and there was an Afghan speaker, and she was talking about the struggles of Afghan women. We were all talking about different countries. She actually broke down in tears. It's that important that there be important, powerful Afghan voices, and especially Afghan female voices such as yours in the diaspora, to be able to keep reminding the world that it's not, we cannot afford to forget what's happening to women there, and it must be really hard to do that, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in to speak to us about that new film, Rule Breakers by Angel Studios. Roya Mahbub and Alistair Burt, Nitasha Kaul, thank you both very much for being on the programme today.